Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Hoo boy, guys. Today's a fun day. I just, these are the kind of videos where I just like gird my loins. I, try to time them to make sure I'm in a good place by the time it's going live, because these are videos that, are just me being salty, and some people love that. I personally enjoy somebody being very salty, even if it's about something that I like. I enjoy a good salty roast. Some people love that, other people don't, and we're just gonna go for it. So I made a video back in November as my Thanksgiving video, my American Thanksgiving video, which was my all-time favorite books. Like it occurred to me all of a sudden that I had never actually made a video telling you my all-time favorite books. And I thought, oh, well, this will be fun. Maybe this can be like my annual Thanksgiving video of reflecting on like, have things changed or not in the year? I already am pretty sure that I'm gonna change some of the things from that video because half of it is more just about like where you are in your life whenever you make it. But anyway, all that to say, you guys really like that video, and it kind of surprised me. I didn't really think of it as like one that you guys would be super into. I think it's been one that people have found me from a lot. And one comment that I've gotten frequently, you should make a video of your least favorite books. And I was like, okay, yes, I think that is a good idea. I tried to come up with a full list of 10, and guys, I couldn't do it really. So I have I have 8 books that I could tell you that I genuinely dislike. I'm sure that there are more, but in terms of ones that have stuck with me in any way, things that I have some level of like visceral distaste for, disappointment in, like something that really stuck with me. I have read plenty of books that I didn't enjoy, that I have roasted to some degree or other on this channel. Like I'm trying to think from last year. The Murder at Mornington Hall. I had problems with that book, and I definitely gave it a very strong critique. That's not a book that I would call like an all-time least favorite, because it just didn't get that deep. Like it wasn't that deep. That's kind of maybe what it boils down to. So I have 8 books that I just think about and I'm just like, ugh. Like something about them kind of just puts me off. And I'm gonna tell you right now, some of these, I can't really tell you much beyond. I just remember being so unhappy reading this that's why it's one of my least favorites. Some of these I have more to say about. But anyway, without further ado, we'll get into the 8 books that I think I could genuinely tell you are my least favorites. And I do have the one that I always say is my all-time least favorite. I have now not read that in 25 years. Well, maybe not 25, but like 20 years. It's been since I've read this, so who knows how I would do. Maybe at some point I'll do a rereading project on some of these, but for now I know what my very least favorite book is in theory, and I'm gonna tell you about them and why I don't like them and why they are memorable to me as things that I don't like. Okay, so the first one I'm gonna mention is one of the ones I have the least to say about, and that is Siddhartha by Herman Hesse. The reason I have this, the reason I just have an abiding memory of really not liking this book is I just remember being so fucking bored. And this is one of the only classics that I've ever read where I really understood and felt the critique that people often have of like, you shouldn't make teenagers read classics because they don't like them. That generally hasn't been my experience, because for whatever reason, I've just always really liked classics. But this was one of those classics that I was made to read in school, and I hated it the entire time. I resented having to write papers about it. I resented having to talk about it. And it's the one that I most can just like feel, I can just connect with people when they talk about not liking classics because of how they were made to learn them in school. Like this is the one that I think about. I don't know how I would do with it as an adult. Maybe I would like it better, but I don't really want to reread it just based on what an unpleasant reading experience that was. And I don't know. I mean, it's a classic for a reason, I'm sure. So I'm sure quality wise, objectively, this is fine, but I just personally strongly disliked it. One that I do not think was objectively good was my least favorite book, I think, of 2018, and that was Winter at Death's Hotel. I forget who the author is, some dude, Kenneth, maybe something. This was a real bad book. I read this as a part of my reading the lowest rated books on my Goodreads TBR challenge that I did that year, which was a fun reading vlog, but I hated that book. It was misogynistic. It was queer baiting and bury your gays tropes. It was so just like prurient in its depiction of women being viciously murdered. Like, I read a lot of mystery. I am used to having grisly scenes of murder and mayhem described to me. I think you can, if you read enough of these, you can kind of get a sense of when that verges into something that feels creepy as opposed to just a part of the book. And for me, this one felt creepy, weird, uncomfortable, gross. I didn't like it. I don't think it's good. It was neither a good historical fiction novel because the prose was not that great, nor was it a good historical mystery. I think it was kind of meaning to straddle that line. It failed at both, in my opinion. I just deeply disliked this book and would not recommend it. And I think it's one of the ones on this list I feel comfortable telling you, like, quality-wise is not good. The reason why it was one of my lowest rated books on my TBR, like, that's why it made the list, because I think the consensus is this is not a good book. One that made my worst of 2019 list, it was actually the top of my worst of 2019 list, and this is one where I don't think objectively I would tell you this is bad. I will tell you though that subjectively, my eyeballs rejected this book and I had to DNF it 50 or 60% of the way through because I just could not take it anymore. And that was Space Opera by Catherynne and Valente. There was something about the writing style, and that is something that will often put me off of a book, is the writing style. Like, that's often sort of the kind of determiner of if I will read more from an author or if I will continue to read in a book, is writing style. The writing style of Catherynne and Valente, as I have experienced it to date, ugh, I just don't like it. It just really puts me off. I find it pretentious. I find it unpleasant to read and spend time with. It really makes me sad because I like the ideas of her books. Like, that's why I keep picking them up, because I'm like, oh, that sounds so cool. But the execution is something that I just cannot get down with as much as I want to. I do have one book left on my TBR from her that I will try to read because it is middle grade. So I'm hoping that whimsical tone often will work better for me in children's literature than in adult literature if I don't like it. So I'm gonna give that one a try, and then we're gonna have to just call it a day with Catherynne and Valente for me. As much as I want to like her, it just doesn't seem to be working out, and Space Opera was not, just big fat not for me. Another one that was just, maybe the reason I think of this as a least favorite book is because it was so disappointing, and that is Wicked by homeboy, what's his name? Gregory something or other, the one who wrote like all the different kind of retellings of some classic villains in literature. I came to this book in the opposite order that most people probably progressed with it in, which is I heard the musical soundtrack, fell in love with the soundtrack, went and saw the actual musical when I was studying abroad in London, loved that, and was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna read this book. And I hated this book. Oh, this was one of the only books I've ever finished that I was just hate reading the entire time. I hated the writing. I thought that it was melodramatic as fuck and just like, I was so unhappy reading it, and I was so disappointed because I loved these properties that had been made from it that were so great to me. Oh, I just didn't enjoy this book at all. I think it's kind of a polarizing book. Like, I know other people who also really didn't like it, but I also know people who absolutely loved it. Clearly it was popular enough that there have been like sequels and properties made. So like, clearly there's an audience for it. That audience, however, is not me, and I would never read another book from that author again. Okay, then we have one on this list where I have a real conflicted relationship with the author, because there have been a few books from this author that just like hit the like yummy, fun fiction spot for me. Like, they just scratch an itch. They're fun. This author's writing is always compulsively readable. I don't know how there's something about the way she structures her sentences or the way she does her character development or her point of view. I've never been able to figure out why this author is someone who, once you get into one of these books, you just can't put it down. But that author is Kristen Ashley. The thing is, at this point, I probably have disliked or not loved more of her books than I have liked or loved. I just keep coming back for more, and I need to stop. I think I figured out which of her books are more likely to work for me, and I just need to stick with those and just completely ignore the others. One of the ones that did not work for me infuriated me, made me so angry, and actually was like a catalyzing point of starting my booktube channel or like keeping going with it, because I was so pissed about this book and I had no one who would listen to me talk about it. And that is Raid by Kristen Ashley. And the reason that this just infuriated me was that this was an abusive relationship. I know that that gets thrown around in romance a lot, and sometimes when people are criticizing like, that's so crazy, it wouldn't really happen, I'm like, you're not getting how the tropes work. And anyway, like, I just think that sometimes there's more nuanced discussion. I don't think that this is one of those books. This is abusive, and it is depicted as romance, and it is scary. Like, he literally, it is every sign of an abusive relationship, and like all of the people in the heroine's life are like, you're just being unreasonable, you need to go back to him. It was scary, it was gross, it made me so mad. It made me so mad. I hated that book so much. Another book that pissed me off and has pissed me off the more I've thought about it over the years. Like, as you know, sometimes with time, like, your opinion will mellow. Opposite. This is like wine. It has grown and ripened and the further I've gotten from this fucking book. And that is The Magicians by Lev Grossman. Now, here's why this whole thing pissed me off the first time I read it. Because at the time, I was still a very big C.S. Lewis fangirl. This series was sold as Harry Potter, but for adults. No, bitch. This is a ripoff of the Chronicles of Narnia. Like, that is it is so transparently, nakedly a cynical retelling of Narnia and executed so poorly. You can critique C.S. Lewis, and especially now, like, ideologically now, I'm much further away from Lewis than I was when I first read this and didn't like it. But like, let's take Philip Pullman for an example. A lot of what he's doing is this kind of an opposite of C.S. Lewis from an ideological standpoint. Like, he is wanting to tell sort of like, have like this fantastical world with opposite thematic content. He does it well. Like, they're well-written books. They're original still. Like, they have their own point of view, their own world. It's not just like a to B. It's not like, oh, in Narnia, there's Edmund, so in Golden Compass, there'll be Tedman. Like, that's not what's happening in those books. Like, it's a respectable critique or like take on or starting point. That is not what happens in The Magicians. It is literally just like a thinly veiled copy paste portal fantasy from Narnia that is meant to just be mocking C.S. Lewis's ideology. And you could do that if you were a good enough writer to do it. The writing in this is not good. It's just poor writing in my opinion. It was so hyped and it got made into a TV series and the whole thing. The writing is not good. The characters are boring. I've been told that they get better in the trilogy. I don't care. If the first book is this bad, it doesn't matter. The more I'm talking about this, maybe this is my actual least favorite book. I need to think about that because I think in terms of my visceral dislike, this may actually be my least favorite book now. I've always said it's a different book, which we'll end with, but I talk about this the more I'm convincing myself it's actually The Magicians, but the writing is not good. The character, the point of view character whose head you are in is just the worst. I am down with an unlikable main character. I often defend unlikable main characters, but this guy can just go straight fuck himself. Hate this book. I really do. This is my least favorite book. Now that we've talked this through, this is my least favorite book. I'll tell you at the end what my previous least favorite book was, just based on talking this through in this conversation. My second to last one I wanted to talk about was probably the most disappointing book I've ever read, and that is Passenger to Frankfurt. This is not the worst book I've ever read, just because it's Agatha Christie, and so like there are moments of the prose that are fun and sparkly like normal. There are certain satisfying little plot beats that will happen that she, you know, are kind of her tried and true tricks. So it's not that this book is utterly devoid of pleasure, but it is bad. It is not a good book. It is definitely the worst Christie that I've read to date. And it is definitely the most disappointing book I've ever read because, you know, any author that you read, you have books that you like more and less from them, like Ilona Andrews, my favorite currently writing author. But, you know, I would say, is it Magic Rises in the Kate Daniel series is very clearly to me like lower tier Ilona Andrews, as is the first book, Magic Bites. Like, to me, I can tell you like, yeah, these are not as good as the rest, but they're still good. Like, they're even a bad book from them is still like fun, enjoyable, whatever. This is a situation where it's my favorite writer and the least favorite book I have for them is objectively not good and is therefore so disappointing. So this is my most disappointing book I've ever read, I think, and is not terrible. Like, it doesn't make me mad the way The Magicians does or the way Raid does. It doesn't make me mad in that way, but it just bums me out. Like, it's the book that probably has bummed me out the most as I've been reading it, just because there's only there's only so many books from any one author, and the fact that one of them is genuinely bad is a disappointment. Okay, and now we come to the book that I would have told you was my least favorite until this conversation. Now I would say it's The Magicians. The book that I would have told you was my least favorite is Call of the Wild, and I want to mention it because apparently there's an adaptation coming out in February for this book. I will not be seeing it. I hate this book. I remember I read it when I was probably like somewhere between 10 and 12 for a class assignment. I just hated it. And I don't really have a more sophisticated reasoning behind it. Like I said, I've never gone back and reread it, but I was bored. I think some of it was everybody else in the class was really enjoying it. And I was like, what the fuck? I hate this so much. I don't tend to like that kind of book. So I'm sure that that's a part of it. Like this type of sort of like wilderness adventure-y thing is is not like necessarily a book that I gravitate towards anyway. I wonder if that stems back from this reading experience. So I can't give you a lot more substance to why I hated this book so much. I just remember having a visceral dislike for it in a way that up until that point in my life, I don't think I'd really experienced. So maybe that's why it has always stuck in my mind as my least favorite. It's just sort of, maybe it was my first book I actively hated that like imprinted on me in some primal way. So Asking You Shall Receive, those were my least favorite books ever. And yeah, there's plenty of other books I haven't liked or I dislike or I could sit here and give you a roast about, but they haven't stuck with me in the same way of just really not enjoying them. So, you know, actually that kind of makes me happy that it was much harder for me in terms of coming up with enough books for this list, as opposed to for my all-time favorite books, I'm like, but then I have to leave this out and this and this. Books I like truly just dislike, hate, are kind of few and far between for me. A lot of times I'm like, ugh, I didn't like that and here's why, but it doesn't stick with me. So, you know, I guess good job, brain, expunging unpleasant reading experiences for the most part from my consciousness. I just sort of move on and forget. All that to say, those were the books that have kind of stuck in my consciousness of books I've disliked. So definitely let me know what you thought of any of these books below and what your personal all-time least favorite book is. Let me know that in the comments below, and I think that will do it. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.